Chapter 35. Alicia's mind was turbulent as she walked on autopilot, following Retta and Kenny. So much had just happened and she felt disconnected, like she was missing context. So her mind whirled and turned until she realized there was so much she just didn't understand. She only knew that Retta had taken them to a place without hope. She just wasn't sure of his intentions. When Alicia next focused on her surroundings, they were in a new part of the city. The streets were cleaner, with no dirt on the sidewalks or the people. The clothing was brighter and made out of softer materials. There was not a lot of foot traffic, but those who were out were not alone. There tended to be one or two people strolling with sun umbrellas to provide shade. Behind them was at least one person carrying their belongings. They even passed a litter being carried down the street on the shoulders of elves dressed only in light vests and a layer of sweat. They gave the trio a wide berth, as if they could catch poverty, even though Sadar had explained that a person's station in this world depended on their magic level. Finally, they slipped off the main street they were on, and Alicia found herself outside a red brick building. The building was rectangular-shaped, with large windows spaced out regularly down the side. The front of the building held two large glass doors. Above them, in block metal letters, read, King Elementary School. Retta walked up to the door and then knocked in what Alicia assumed was a secret code. Looking through the glass, Alicia could see nothing but the next set of doors, so she jumped when there was a slight fluttering just inside. Then a lanky teenager stepped out of the shadows. They wore a dark, short cloak with a hood over their head. It cast a shadow over their face, giving them a sense of mystery that seemed dramatic. They made a point of looking over the trio and then pulled one of the doors open a fraction. Retta indicated for Kenny and herself to go in first. Kenny walked right in, with Alicia hurrying behind him. She quickly pulled her son behind her before she had even consciously registered that two more youths were hidden in the shadows. Both had pulled out knives on them. The teenagers stared at Kenny and her with distrust. Alicia's entire body tensed up, and her mind kept running through the moves on how to disarm an opponent. It was something she had practiced thousands of times, but never actually had to use. Any movement, and she was ready. Even if she were hurt, it would give Retta time to get her son out of here. Liza, Eric, Santh. Retta turned to each youth as he said their name, making sure to look at each in turn. Do not be daft, boys. Put away those weapons. You know who I am. We know you, the first youth said in a nasal tone and hesitant in a language he was not native to. We don't know them, though. Liza, these are my friends, and you best leave them alone. This young man is stronger than Santh by a lot. Not a chance, Liza said. Santh is the best rocker flinger in the entire city. Retta turned and gave a slight nod to Kenny. Alicia noticed that in each of the corners of the vestibule there were piles of small pebbles. They started to rise, causing the teenagers to jump. Then the smallest of the youths turned excitedly to the second youth, talking rapidly in Elven and pointing at the rocks. The piles continued to lift until Kenny had combined them all together in a giant ball that rotated above their heads. The trio stood with mouths open and eyes wide. When the ball began to separate and form 4 separate piles, which were then sent back to the corners of the room, their eyes opened even wider. Have you come to drop him off? Liza asked. We will gladly take him. No, that is his mother. They are just passing through. The 3 seemed to stand a little straighter at his answer. The 2 with knives immediately tucked them away. Is she here to adopt more? The shortest youth asked, his English thick with an Elven accent. No, Eric. He is not adopted. That's his birth mother. The 3 youths started talking to Retta in Elven, each speaking faster than he could respond. Alicia could not understand any of it, but Kenny reached and put his hand in hers. Finally, Liza opened the second set of doors and motioned them through. The 3 teenagers stayed guard on the other side. The 2 had disappeared back into the shadows, but Liza stood facing them, his face still hidden in the cloak. What did they say? Alicia asked Retta as they walked down an empty hallway with closed doors lined up on each side. They were just confused and curious. Retta reached down and mussed up Kenny's hair. Kenny moved even closer to his mother, holding her hand tighter. Was it a good idea to tell them about Kenny? What if they go and tell someone? I'm counting on it. But don't worry. No one here will tell anything to anyone related to the king. You will not find a group of people that hates him more than in this building." "Why are we in a school anyway?" Alicia asked. Retta reached out and opened one of the two large doors in front of them. It opened into a school gymnasium full of children. There had to be at least 100 camped in the small room. They ranged in age from teenagers to infants, and it was easy to tell that the older children held a lot of responsibility for the younger children. But for containing this many children, the room was too quiet. It was the occasional squeal of delight that was followed by whispers to be quiet. Even the footsteps seemed muted in the room, like they had all figured out how to walk by making as little noise as possible. It was disconcerting. Once they entered, Retta stopped and held on to the door, helping it to close quietly. But even that click caused the room full of children to freeze and turn their heads toward the group. Alicia looked back at the children, staying still until they gradually lost interest and went back to their quiet activities. Alicia looked down at Kenny, who seemed to be studying all the children. Retta had left them, already walking towards the only elf that seemed to be of adult age, if barely. Retta beckoned them over. Kenny let go of Alicia's hand and started walking through the various groups. He watched one group of children about his age playing with a group of dolls. When a young boy looked up, he smiled at Kenny, and Kenny tentatively smiled back. The boy went back to playing, and Kenny turned away and finished walking towards Retta. "Alicia, I would like you to meet Sisha. They run this orphanage." Retta's voice was barely a whisper. Alicia looked at the elf. Sisha was taller than Retta and thinner. They seemed to have been whittled down to almost nothing. Sisha was dressed in a shirt and pants similar in style to the ones Alicia now wore, except the color had faded out of them and there were patches made in the coarser clothing. Their face was narrow, just shy of being gaunt, and their hair was dark but cut close to their scalp. "It's so nice to meet you!" Their voice was almost musical. They held out their hand, their face full of amusement. "I've never met a human before." Alicia held up her own hand and awkwardly shook the unmoving elf's hand. "It is nice to meet you as well. Do you run this entire orphanage?" Her voice came out loud, and many of the children looked at her with startled expressions. "I have help from some of the older children." Their voice was clear but quiet. They knelt down and spoke to Kenny. "What do you think of our home?" "I think it could use more toys so that the kids can smile more. If it is all right, I would like to bring some next time we come to visit." At this, Kenny looked up at Retta. "Do you have any toys in your shop we could bring?" "No, not there, but I will find a way to trade for some." Kenny gave a brief nod as if to accept his words as acceptable. Then he turned back to look at the children until he noticed a group around his age that seemed to be quietly playing a game that looked almost like Duck, Duck, Goose. "May I go join them?" Kenny turned first to the young elf and then to Alicia before running off to join them as quietly as he could manage. "Why are the children so quiet?" Alicia asked, her voice a whisper. "Our last home was raided because some of the children got too loud. We lost 23 children that night. Those that were there remember, and those that have come after have been told by the other children. No one wants to be found again." "Oh," Alicia gasped and then brought her voice back down. "Who would want to hurt children?" Sisha shared a brief look with Retta before asking, "How much do you know about our world?" "Not enough, apparently." "The children here all have parents that were sentenced by the king. They are all in prison or dead. At least, these are the ones that we have managed to help escape or have found on the streets." Alicia looked to her son, checking to make sure that he was safe. He was currently walking around a circle of children, quietly tapping on their heads. The youngest held her shirt to her mouth to soften her giggles, her black curls bouncing silently as they played. Why would the king want to hurt these kids? The elf looked at the children, then at Retta, as if deciding if to speak. "I think," they said, then hesitated. "I think he is afraid that someone will challenge him, even though none of these could. Most are the children of farmers and merchants." Retta opened some of his bags, showing Sisha the contents as Alicia detached from the other adults and watched Kenny playing with the children. They had been running from Kenny's father for less than a week, but all the families here had been running for much longer. She was so focused on her son that it was a lot to adjust to all these other children being cared for by one young adult. I don't have all the payment this week, Alicia heard the elf say. I know we're still behind, and we are working on it. The children were now pointing at objects and speaking, the words too quiet for Alicia to hear. Kenny appeared to be copying what they said. I know we said that we would catch up this week. It is just that Nico came back and said the market had been closed down in Edinburgh. We don't have someone who can shift anymore, not since we lost Matt. Nico has gone to Jellic to sell, but it will be a while before he can make it back. Alicia turned around, realizing the conversation that was happening behind her. You can't possibly be selling to them. She tried to keep her voice low so none of the children could hear. It's what I do, Retta said. I wouldn't be much of a merchant if I didn't sell things. I'll figure out a way to help clear their tab. I still have a little money in my bank account if I can get to it. Just give them what you have now. Retta looked at her as if lost in thought. Then he turned and continued his transaction with Sisha.